On November 25th, 2020, it was the day before Thanksgiving, I received a phone call shortly after 4 o'clock from the Mount Morris police chief. And he asked me kind of frantically, is anybody at my house? And I said, my daughter Melissa is. And so there's a fire. And it's bad.
My sister Melissa, she was 9 months pregnant, about to have a baby in 2 days.
What do you remember from November 25th, 2020?
It was my 17th birthday. My birthday is November 25th. Me and my mom were at a store. We were picking out a cake, and we finally got home, and my brother Carl frantically is calling my mom, have you heard from Melissa? Have you heard from Melissa? And we're like, no, why?
Carl said, the neighbor called, and he said the house is on fire. So at that point, my heart just sank because we were not sure if Melissa was home or not. I just wanted them both to be okay. And all I could think was, please just have one of them, at least one of them, make it through the night.
When everyone said they didn't know where she was and they couldn't hear from her, I knew. Just had that gut feeling that she was gone.
For a huge tragedy like that to occur the day before Thanksgiving, on Julia's birthday, right before the baby was to be born, it was just so much.
When I arrived at the scene, I was told the victim was found laying on the floor in front of the stove. Melissa Lamish was a 27-year-old EMT. We're trying to figure out why there's a fire in the kitchen. We couldn't tell if it was intentional or accidental. There was all kinds of possibilities running through our heads, but we didn't know what happened to her.
My daughter Melissa, she's very thoughtful, and that's why she got into being a paramedic. She wanted to help people.
When Melissa first told me she was pregnant, she told me a couple things about the dad. Matt Plody, they on and off hung out for years and had a similar clique of friends.
Matt Plody was a firefighter paramedic. He was a good firefighter. Matt was somebody that was dependable on the fire scene. He was just one of the guys.
He was keeping a secret the fact that he fathered a baby in the hopes that the child wouldn't be born.
For Matt, he never had a child before. He didn't want to make it known to other people because he just wanted to keep that part of his life private.
Matthew Plody was a person of interest on day one, simply because he was at the scene.
Matthew Plody later told investigators that he was at the house to see Melissa to talk about the baby.
He admitted he was there. He told them everything that they would have needed to know about his presence there. He didn't have anything to hide. They discussed their finances, and then Matt left as she was making some lunch.
She talked about cooking some food or something, but I didn't stay around.
I believe from the very beginning he was trying to set up a story that there was an accidental house fire, that she had been cooking something, which would explain why her body was found in the kitchen.
When you got the call about Matthew Plody possibly being involved in a murder, what did you think?
Denial that it wasn't one of our people. It doesn't chime with what a firefighter is. We put fires out, we don't start fires. We help people, we don't hurt people. It is unthinkable.
Before the fire that set Melissa Lamish's home ablaze on November 25, 2020, the day had started with excited anticipation. Melissa was due to give birth to a baby boy in just 2 days, and Thanksgiving was a day away.
She was going to have a nice private Thanksgiving with Dad. So I gave her a call the morning of the 25th, and we talked for about 2.5 hours.
Cassie Ball and her sister Melissa had lots to chat about.
We talked a lot about the future. We talked about what was going to come with the baby. The conversation ended because she looked outside the window. She said, "You got to be kidding me." She's like, "He's freaking here again. I told him he's got to stop doing this."
At the door was 33-year-old Matthew Plody, the expectant father of Melissa's baby.
She said, "I'll tell you what he wanted. I'll give you a call right back. Bye." Hung up.
Did she ever call back?
No, my sister never called back.
Melissa Lamish and Matthew Plody met and became friends 7 years earlier while each was in college. They maintained a casual relationship. The friendship, says the Lamish family, cooled off once Melissa let Matthew know about the pregnancy. Melissa told her family he did not share her interest in becoming a parent.
He wanted her to get an abortion. She didn't want that. He blamed her, ghosted her. It did come to upset Melissa because they were friends for so long.
She thought he'd at least want to be involved a little bit.
Yes. Melissa thought that he would want something to do with the baby. To that point, she thought he was a pretty nice guy. Then she saw a different side of him, and that really upset her.
Deanna and Gus were fully prepared to help their daughter with whatever she needed for the baby.
I had said, if he doesn't want to be a part of the baby's life, don't push. The baby is your child.
We told her whatever you needed, I'll help you financially.
She knew she had plenty of family support. Everything would have been fine.
The Lamish family was a large one. Melissa had 4 siblings. She was already an aunt and was known for following her own path.
Melissa was unapologetically herself, and that is what she was. She's the perfect mix of sugar and spice. Not too spicy, not too sugary, it's just perfect.
Melissa was strong. She was fierce. She was a go-getter.
Melissa liked to reinvent herself through hairstyles and careers. Most recently, the 27-year-old had been working as an EMT.
Melissa kind of fell into the line of work. She had an experience in college that took her to an emergency room, and she really appreciated how she was treated, and she wanted to do the same for other people.
You're proud?
Yes, it was her job, and she took it seriously.
As her due date neared, Melissa had to stop working. To make things easier, she moved into her childhood home with her dad. Her parents had divorced several years earlier. Melissa grew increasingly excited about becoming a mom, even though she and Matthew had little contact.
Melissa would continue to send him like sonograms or when things would happen, because sometimes he would respond a little bit, but she didn't know really where he stood exactly. But Melissa wanted her baby to have the option of having the mother and the father. So she kept the communication with him. He often shut down.
Matthew wasn't just shutting out Melissa. He kept the fact he was going to be a father a secret, including from his co-workers and Chief Rob Schultz at the Carroll Stream Fire District, several counties away from Melissa's home.
We're here 24 hours a day, and it's just a normal course of being a firefighter, and that you talk about your family, your personal life, and what's going on, good, bad, or indifferent. Well, I knew Matt as a single guy that didn't have any kids.
Even Matthew's own parents did not know about the pregnancy until Melissa told them.
Melissa wanted them to have the opportunity to be a part of their grandchild's life.
How did Melissa say his parents responded to the news of a grandson?
Melissa said that his parents were very nice, that they said, "Let me know what you need. I'll help you any way we can."
How did Matthew find out that Melissa had told his parents they were having a baby?
I believe that the parents then approached him, but it was not long after that that she had said, "He's mad I told them."
Because he had kept it a secret?
Yeah.
Melissa celebrated the upcoming birth with family and friends at a baby shower. She had let everyone know she was having a boy. It was a happy time until nearly 2 months later on that fateful Thanksgiving Eve.
It was just all so surreal.
While Melissa's family tried to process their loss, investigators were hoping to provide them with answers about what had happened.
The fire debris is everywhere.
Brian Ketter, then the lead detective at the Ogle County Sheriff's Office, headed to the kitchen where Melissa had been found.
Everything's covered in smoke. Ceilings, walls have fallen down, and everything's a mess.
Ketter and other investigators also headed outside to an ambulance to view Melissa.
We've noticed that she didn't have a whole lot of fire damage to her,
What does that say?
that the fire didn't kill her.
We needed to identify the area of fire origin and what may have caused that fire.
Michael Poole, then a special agent with the Illinois State Fire Marshal's Office, was trying to establish whether the fire at Melissa Lamish's home was accidental or intentionally set.
What are you looking for?
Where the greatest damage is at, where the fire patterns are at, we're looking at everything in this picture that may have something to do with the origin of the fire.
Where do you think the fire started?
I believe the fire's over here. Actually, it's in these cabinets, where these cabinets used to be above the stove area.
But when Poole examined the stove, thinking that perhaps cooking flames caused the cabinets to catch fire, he saw that neither the oven nor the burners had been turned on.
All the controls are in the off position, and there is no fire damage in the interior of this oven to show that this was some type of cooking fire.
Poole also did not find any electrical issues.
So we're starting to run out of accidental causes. And we could identify at least 3 very simple and easy ways to exit this residence.
Much of the house besides the kitchen remained accessible, so Poole thought Melissa could have found a way out.
It was what I would call a survivable fire. This young lady was a paramedic. She's used to dealing with emergencies. For her to totally lose her perspective and stand there and try and fight that fire, when you start putting all these things together, then you start coming up with, okay, this makes no sense.
While Poole was inspecting the house, investigators talked with the Lamish family. Ketter learned about the phone call that day between Melissa and Cassie that Melissa ended when Matthew Plody arrived at the house.
We learned from the family that he was a fireman.
Melissa's brother Carl told investigators he had already spoken on the phone to Plody, telling him he knew he had been at the house that day. Carl also told Plody about the fire and that someone had died, but not that it was Melissa. Investigators did that when they asked Plody to come in for an interview that evening.
Melissa is deceased.
As you watched his interview, what did you think about his demeanor, his responses?
Emotionless, very soft-spoken. Matthew said he went to talk to Melissa. He wanted to talk about money, about being allowed at the hospital when she was set to be induced in 2 days, and that's why he was there.
In that interview, Matthew made a reference to a deadline when explaining his decision to go to the house that day.
There's a deadline for that, so we were trying to do the deadline for a pregnancy. There's a deadline.
It was a phrase that investigators didn't quite know how to interpret.
Was Matthew a suspect at that point?
No, he was not a suspect.
What are the next steps in the investigation?
We need to determine the cause of death. We don't know if Melissa had a medical episode or if somebody did something to her or if the carbon monoxide from the fire killed her. We don't know.
To get those answers, 2 autopsies would be performed. One 2 days after Melissa's death, and then another about 2 weeks later while lab work was completed. The results? Normal carbon monoxide levels, and no soot was found in her system. What was found was evidence of strangulation, including hemorrhages around her neck. Melissa, it was determined, had been murdered.
We have to plan a funeral, and while we were still waiting for things, it was nearly 3 weeks.
On December 14th, 2020, the Lamish family held a funeral for Melissa and her unborn baby, who Melissa was going to name Barrett.
We didn't get to kiss his forehead, touch his cheek. The first time we got any kind of contact, they were in a casket. And the first time I touched his hand, I just remember gasping, and I had decided I was gonna keep holding his hand. Something Melissa didn't get to do.
Melissa's family was convinced that Matthew Plody was responsible for their profound grief, that he killed Melissa simply because he did not want to become a father. Matthew, investigators would learn, had been juggling multiple women in his life.
I believe he did it because he's selfish and it was going to change his life having a child.
Melissa wasn't asking him for anything. No money, nothing. He could have walked away, so why?
I think it was his pride. He wanted to keep it a secret.
With no other suspects, and with Matthew admitting to being at Melissa's home that day, investigators were also circling in on Plody, but were still gathering evidence.
We had collected DNA evidence at the autopsy, and we sent that to the crime lab. We'd gotten search warrants for phone records. We were in the process of getting that information back.
They were also waiting to get information back from Amazon about possible recordings from an Echo Dot that Ketter had noticed and was retrieved from the fire-damaged kitchen.
We were hoping it would record conversations or something from the day between the two of them.
That Amazon Echo Dot could turn this case around.
Could have. It could have recorded Melissa screaming for help, yelling out his name. We didn't know what it would be.
I was contacted by our police chief to give him a call immediately that he had something very important, sensitive to talk about.
When Carroll Stream Fire Chief Rob Schultz returned the call, he couldn't believe what he was hearing.
One of our firefighters was being investigated in a suspect in a murder that occurred about 2 hours from our fire district's boundaries.
It was now 9 months since Melissa Lamish's death in a house fire that had sent shockwaves through the community in Mount Morris, where her home was located. But firefighters where Matthew Plody worked in Carroll Stream, about 75 miles away, were unaware of the fire. Plody had said nothing.
When you heard the name Matthew Plody in that call, what did you think?
I was, there's no way this could be Matt. They have something wrong here.
But that disbelief started to change when Chief Schultz checked to see if Plody worked the day of the fire and learned he had called out sick.
That knot in my stomach, literally wanted to throw up.
The fire chief's sinking feeling only got worse when he learned that investigators believed Matthew killed Melissa and their unborn child because he did not want to be a father, and then set the house on fire in hopes of destroying evidence.
We had placed Matt immediately on paid administrative leave. When I called Matt in to tell him, I just said, I'm being told that you're under investigation for a murder of your estranged girlfriend and the baby that you're a father of.
Did you ask him why he hadn't mentioned it?
Didn't feel that it was something that he wanted to talk about, and he felt it was a personal matter and didn't want to disclose it.
While on leave on August 28, 2021, Matthew Plody was called in again for questioning.
My name is Brian. I'm a lieutenant with the Sheriff's Office.
Plody willingly appeared without an attorney.
I want to contribute and be in the life of our child.
Over the course of the 7-hour interview, he explained to investigators why he was at Melissa's the day of the fire.
So we talked about, what I could pay her, and that we just said we'd work it out later to visiting.
He said when he left that afternoon, Melissa was talking about making lunch.
She talked about trying to make some food or something, but I didn't stay around.
Most of the 7 hours was filled with investigators asking questions and Matthew Plody saying very little.
So did you go there to kill her? Or did you just go there to talk to her and something happened?
We kept accusing him of things, and he never said, I didn't do it. He never said, you guys got the wrong person. He was just emotionless, and he wouldn't communicate. Not once in 7 hours, not once did he get upset. Most people would have told us, I'm done, but he just sat and listened to us.
Had you ever experienced an interview like that before?
Never.
It wasn't just the lack of communication that made Lieutenant Ketter think Plody was guilty, but on the rare times Plody did talk, the unusual way he phrased things.
Did you intend to kill her? I had no intention of hurting Melissa.
During that 7-hour interview, at one point, Matthew did say, I had no intentions of hurting Melissa.
Did that make you do a double take?
Yes, because in our opinion, that means I hurt Melissa, but I didn't intend to do it.
But it was not an admission of guilt. So Ketter wanted to see if Plody would say anything more and made an unusual request of Fire Chief Schultz.
We asked Chief Schultz if he would wear a listening device so that he would have a conversation with Matthew. We would be able to hear it and record it and try to gain some evidence that way.
When Brian asks this of me, I'm pretty taken back. And initially I had said no way. And I did some thinking about it and called him back and said yes.
You have a lot of responsibilities as a fire chief, but I can't imagine you ever thought wearing a wiretap would be one of them.
No. I don't freely talk about it. It's not something that I'm proud of. It was something that needed to be done in the hopes of helping the investigation. There's a grieving family out there that's looking for answers.
And so on September 9th, 2021, Chief Schultz called Matthew Plody and asked him to come in to talk.
And he agreed. He says, I'd like to come talk to you.
Matthew came in later that day. The fire station was quickly cleared of all other personnel, and Brian Ketter and other investigators headed over. They were able to place a device that just recorded audio on a phone on Fire Chief Schultz's desk and listened in from outside the fire station and from an adjoining office.
How are you feeling?
Nervous, very nervous, a bit scared.
Chief Schultz tried to learn what happened to Melissa by appealing to Plody on a personal level.
I'm trying to find answers, and I'm trying to help you. Help me walk through, what happened?
But the nearly 2-hour conversation yielded very little info from Plody, with him again barely speaking about the day Melissa died.
I remember saying, fill in all the blanks for me. And isn't it odd that no one here knows that you're going to be a father? Like, that's something we celebrate here.
What do you say?
Nothing. Head was down a lot of the conversation.
Did he ever say, I didn't kill Melissa and my baby?
He did not.
With none of the interviews resulting in a confession, there was still no arrest, something that exasperated the Lamish family.
Oh, it was excruciating. And I mean, we were pestering the police constantly.
There were several reasons for the delay. There was the wait for the fire marshal's report, which concluded that the fire cause is most likely incendiary in nature, possibly the result of a fire being intentionally set in an effort to conceal a potential homicide. And getting information from Amazon on whether Matthew's voice was recorded on that echo dot they retrieved from the kitchen took time.
It did reveal voices, but nothing that proved helpful for our case. It wasn't even on the day of the murder.
Investigators had also waited to obtain Matthew Ploty's DNA until after the August 2021 interview, hoping he would first confess to killing Melissa.
We got the results back saying that it was his DNA under her fingernails.
Turn around, hands behind your back.
On March 9th, 2022, after a year and a half of investigating Melissa Lamish's death, with a police body cam rolling, Matthew Ploty was arrested on charges including murder, the intentional homicide of an unborn child, and arson.
Technically, right now, you are under arrest.
The motive that the state painted was just an inaccurate portrayal of Matt.
By the time of Matthew Ploty's arrest, he had hired attorney John Cupp.
They painted him to be this monster that, at the drop of a hat, after a career of saving people, decided to suddenly start killing people.
You were indicted by the grand jury.
The evidence doesn't show that Matthew Ploty murdered Melissa Lamish or their unborn child.
Melissa Lamish was loved. This is not someone who had enemies lined up around the block who wanted to see her deceased. Rather, there was one person and one person only, and that was Matthew Ploty.
Yesterday.
Assistant State's Attorneys Allison Huntley and Heather Cruz were part of the team prosecuting Matthew Ploty.
All signs pointed toward Matthew Ploty from the very beginning.
What we wanted to portray to the jury is that he was a guy saving lives for his entire career.
Defense attorneys John Cupp and Liam Dixon say their client was misunderstood and as a firefighter was a responsible person, not a murderer.
Matt's plan was to financially support her. He had offered her money before. His plan was to be there.
Matthew Ploty pleaded not guilty to all charges. On March 18, 2024, more than 3 years since Melissa's murder, his trial began in Ogle County, Illinois. The prosecution argued that Ploty murdered Melissa and their unborn child because he didn't want to be a father.
He was keeping a secret the fact that he fathered a baby in the hopes that the child wouldn't be born.
The defense told the jury there's no evidence Ploty harmed Melissa and that he had gone to see her that day just to talk.
They discussed their finances. They discussed what would happen with the birth of the child. And then Matt left as she was making some lunch.
I believe from the very beginning he was trying to set up a story that there was an accidental house fire, that she had been cooking something. I believe that was how he laid out the scene, which would explain why her body was found in the kitchen.
Prosecutors called fire investigator Michael Poole to testify about his findings. He told the court that he found no evidence of an electrical or cooking fire.
And you start ruling these various different things out.
How certain are you that this fire was intentionally set?
I'm certain that it was intentionally set.
No doubt.
No doubt.
During cross-examination, the defense suggested that Michael Poole was unsure of his findings, citing language in his report such as most likely and it is believed.
You use the phrase, it is believed, because that's an uncertain opinion, correct?
It's just the way I described it.
But that's an uncertain opinion, correct?
Not to me.
Poole says he was just using standard terms used during fire investigations.
I review information.
The state also called forensic pathologist Dr. Amanda Humans, who had performed one of the autopsies.
There was no soot in her airways. And her measure of carbon monoxide in the blood was within normal limits. So she was deceased prior to the fire.
Dr. Humans testified that Melissa's body showed evidence of a violent struggle. The jury heard about the hemorrhages around Melissa's neck, a specific type of broken blood vessels called petechial hemorrhages, which according to Dr. Humans is a telltale sign of strangulation.
This is the most petechial hemorrhages I've ever seen in a strangulation case.
To sit through trial was beyond devastating.
Deanna Lamish came to court every day.
I had been prepped by the victim's advocate. Things were going to be gruesome. I was going to see a lot.
Deanna says she always kept Melissa and her baby Barrett in her thoughts.
She was so strong-willed and had such pride. That baby was going to be a strong guy.
Matthew Ploty's parents also attended the trial.
They've been by his side throughout this?
Yes, every court date.
One of the most important witnesses to testify was Melissa's sister Cassie, talking about the day Melissa died and that call, which Cassie says was interrupted by Matthew Ploty.
What was the last thing your sister said to you during that phone call? Sorry. She said she'd make the conversation quick and she'd call me right back. Did Melissa call you back? No.
Jurors watched those recorded interviews with investigators, where Matthew Ploty admitted he was at the house.
How long were you at the house? It wasn't more than an hour, I don't think.
Prosecutors wanted jurors to hear that phrase Ploty used,
And there's a deadline for that. So
referring to the birth of his son as a deadline.
He said, there's a deadline to these kinds of things. That was his deadline to murder Melissa.
If you think about it logically, Thursday is Thanksgiving and Friday is her due date, his deadline. The only time to do this was Wednesday. So he took off work and completed his goal.
The prosecutors found even more telling what Ploty didn't say, especially during that 7-hour interview, 4 hours of which were played for the jury.
What is chilling is the fact that he never denied murdering Melissa, and he never denied killing her baby boy. Not one time. It's chilling from a personal perspective, but that's also excellent evidence that the defendant couldn't bring himself to lie about that fact.
Over the course of multiple interviews for several hours, he was calm and reserved.
His silence, defense says, actually points to his innocence, not his guilt.
He had a right to remain silent, but the police are allowed to continue to poke and prod and try to get him confused, and he just didn't buy into any of that.
They say their client, when he did speak, was open with investigators.
He told them everything about his presence there. He didn't hide any of that. He just never admitted what they wanted him to admit, which was that he killed Melissa and his child, which he didn't do.
Do you think the fact that the fire didn't burn down the whole house, does that play in Matthew's favor or not?
I believe it does. If he's a firefighter and he's trying to destroy evidence, you would think he would have the ability to set a fire to complete that goal.
But during 3 days of testimony, the state laid out the case that it could have only been Matthew Ploty who set that fire to conceal evidence of the murder of Melissa and their unborn baby, something the defense was about to contest.
The state's fire expert deemed that this was arson.
He did, and we had an expert who directly contradicted that.
What do you think of Matthew Ploty's interview with investigators? Join the conversation on Facebook and X.
The state's expert didn't do a fraction of what he should have done to properly determine the cause of the fire. This should have been an undetermined fire.
To try to poke holes in the prosecution's case, the defense called only one witness, retired firefighter and independent inspector John Knapp. He was not at the scene of the fire, but did study reports and photos.
I felt like there was probably more information that could have been gathered that wasn't there.
He disputed the prosecution's claim that Ploty set the fire. He testified that the evidence collected doesn't prove that the fire was intentionally set by anyone.
I couldn't make that determination to whether or not what the cause of the fire should be other than determined.
When you're not there at the scene, you don't see what we've seen. Not always does every little tidbit end up in a report.
Michael Poole says the defense's expert is wrong and that his investigation was thorough.
We're looking for anything and everything that could have contributed to the origins of this fire. If they weren't there, you needed to be there when we were doing the examination.
Matthew Plody waived his right to testify. During closing arguments, the defense accused investigators of having tunnel vision.
The complete lack of investigation of any other individual is shocking. I've never seen such a poorly investigated case.
They didn't follow up on any other leads that may have happened, any other boyfriends, anybody else.
If there had been another lead, investigators certainly would have followed it. There simply wasn't.
Prosecutors told the jury that the evidence was clear. Melissa Lamish was strangled to death by the only person who had a motive to kill her, Matthew Plody, who was juggling multiple women and didn't want to change his lifestyle.
He clearly did not want to be involved in this baby's life. This is someone who actively hid the fact that a woman in the community was carrying his child.
He clearly had made some choices about having multiple relationships, but did not make him a killer.
The trial lasted a week, and after 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Matthew Plody, guilty of first-degree murder.
Guilty of all charges.
I could hear people sobbing and gasping, but I couldn't even lift my head.
What did you feel?
Shock. Shock.
The verdict was a relief for Chief Robert Schultz. He says the case had long weighed on him and everyone at the firehouse who had worked with Plody.
There was a huge closure here when Matt was found guilty. You still have the family out there that lost a daughter or lost a grandson. You're never going to change that.
3 months later, on June 27, 2024, Melissa's family and friends gathered at the courthouse for sentencing. Matthew Plody listened with little reaction as victim impact statements were read.
We lost Melissa in the prime of her life. Melissa and Barrett should still be alive and enjoying life with their loving family.
I shouldn't have spent Thanksgiving that year feeling like there was nothing to be thankful for. This shouldn't be real, but it is real. It is all real because one man decided to make this decision that Barrett and Melissa weren't needed or wanted. None of this had to happen. All he had to do was walk away.
Matthew Plody also addressed the court with this brief statement.
Say anything other than I share the pain and sadness of the loss of Melissa and Barrett.
Do you believe him?
Oh, no, definitely not.
For him to say, I too have pain and loss from Melissa and Barrett, like, what a joke.
The judge imposed the maximum sentence.
Mr. Plody, you are sentenced to natural life imprisonment.
Life behind bars.
Matthew Plody will likely die in prison. Does that give you any sort of peace?
No. I know it's the justice system, and we received our justice, but nothing about this is just.
It's not fair.
Nothing about this is fair. No punishment in the world brings them back.
I miss her personality. I think it's her sass.
Melissa's sister, Julia Lynn, tries to hold on to fond memories.
Melissa was, I believe still is, the best person that I've ever met.
What do you miss most about your daughter? And there's a grandson you never got to meet.
Where do you start? I mean, he was going to come into my home. I was looking forward to raising him.
Through all of their grief, the Lamish family honors Melissa in many ways.
We took toys to a local homeless shelter.
To honor Barrett?
To honor Barrett. We donated money to the no-kill shelter that Melissa got her cat from.
They also sponsored a tree at a local arboretum that Melissa loved.
Every year at the holidays, this tree will always be lit as part of their display.
Shining brightly like Melissa always did.
Also strong. She was fierce. She was powerful. nothing was going to stop her, and she was always going to prove herself, and she'd do whatever it takes to do it.
You've probably heard of the NCIS from the hit TV series, but we're about to take you inside its real-life work. Listen to 48 Hours NCIS early and ad-free on the 48 Hours Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts.
As a kid growing up in Chicago, there was one horror movie I was too scared to watch. It was called Candyman. But did you know that the movie Candyman was partly inspired by an actual murder? Listen to Candyman, the true story behind the bathroom mirror murder, wherever you get your podcasts.
Greenwood. I lived here half of my life. Everyone knows everyone and their business. I have decided to set the story straight. It's still surreal. I still think maybe I'll wake up. We were out for my birthday. I remember I was just sitting at the bar, and he sat down beside me, and we just talked the rest of the night.
You were there the night she met Davis.
I was there that night.
Did it seem like there was chemistry right off the bat?
Immediately. I would immediately.
Davis, he was so kind. And I mean, his heart was huge. We enjoyed each other so much. It was an amazing 6 months.
Meredith, her and Davis, they would go on away weekends a lot. I liked him. His smile was so contagious, and he's just such a sweet guy. I would have never expected this to happen, ever.
Greenwood County 911. But it's a one-person car wreck. Okay, it was a car wreck and somebody is hurt?
I pull up right beside Davis's car, and he wasn't in his car. And that's when I noticed his airbags were out. So then that's when I kind of started looking at the car more and noticed that his front tire was smashed in. And I remember looking, and I noticed there's a body. Meredith just started like screaming, like, "Who is it? Who is it?"
And you look over. Mm-hmm. What do you think you were looking at?
Davis.
He was laying there, and his head was rested on the slot like a pillow. And he was shirtless, and his face was covered in blood.
Was there anything about the scene that struck you as odd?
Davis being all the way on the other side of the road, the car being wrecked, like none of that. I couldn't piece anything together.
Davis's car was way over there, and his body was way down here. And I was like, well, how did he end up down here?
That's quite a distance.
Yeah.
To here.
It is quite a distance.
Originally, it came out as a possible traffic accident, and then once officers arrived on scene, they realized it was more than that.
A lot of people think it was an auto accident. Well, no, it wasn't.
I do believe that this was an accident and not an intentional killing.
It was a murder.
I was in shock. I was like, it doesn't even make sense.
The photographs of the crime scene, the text messages from Davis's phone, the ring videos, looking at everything and the totality of the case was very powerful.
How could any of this possibly happen?
There's so many things missing from the story. And once I kind of get that out there, then I can close the chapter.
And 1028 Whiskey Echo Victor 253.
It was May 7th, 2023, just after 1 a.m., when authorities responded to a reported road accident on a secluded, dead-end street in Greenwood, South Carolina.
Start roping this off because this is going to be a crime scene.
At the edge of the nearby woods, they would find 46-year-old Davis McClendon's body. But what they saw at first was on the road itself. A shirt, a shoe, and a mangled sedan.
And there was significant damage to the fender.
It was a BMW 5 Series, similar to this one, we're using to demonstrate the position of the vehicle that night. After first responders had locked everything down, Greenwood County Sheriff's Office investigator Patrick Durkin arrived to photograph the scene.
The front driver's side wheel was turned slightly.
Whatever had transpired at this deserted crossroads, Durkin's job was to freeze it in time. First responders had thought Davis McClendon's injuries seemed consistent with having been hit by a vehicle, though no other vehicle relating to the collision was there. They'd found Davis's body about 50 feet away from the BMW, leading them to suspect he'd been outside his car when he was hit.
There was no rain or anything that would potentially wash anything away, so the main thing I focused on was the vehicle.
Durkin says he noticed some strange damage to the BMW.
Usually when you'd think of a normal fender bender, it would just kind of be pressed into it, and this was torn back like a tuna can in a sense.
It had made authorities wonder if it was a hit and run or something more sinister. Those airbags were out and a phone was on the front passenger seat. Durkin saw more debris in the road, but nothing particularly telling.
The assumption was that he was struck by a vehicle.
Investigator Ronnie Powell from the Greenwood County Sheriff's Office says authorities had learned more by speaking to two women at the scene, Meredith Haney and Megan McGovern, who'd called 911. Megan often babysat for Meredith's 3 children.
They provided statements of what they saw and what had occurred all night long.
What did Meredith say?
She pretty much gave a summary of the whole backstory, that she had been dating Davis.
Meredith had told authorities that Davis left a club they'd been in that night, calling her minutes later from the road, saying he was parked at the intersection of Avid Road and Sawgrass Place. When he'd put her on hold and then failed to come back on the line, Meredith was worried and got a ride there from Megan. It was Megan, the babysitter, who'd gotten out of her car and was the first to see Davis's body.
That news must have been stunning.
Yeah, it was devastating. It was crushing.
Davis McClendon was the ultimate people person, without an enemy in the world, say his friends Chip Funderbunk.
Everybody loved Davis. He was just awesome.
Zach Calhoun.
He loved big.
And Johnny Coates.
And what Zach said, he was everyone's best friend.
He was.
He loved everyone.
But none of them could remember Davis ever mentioning the specifics of his love life, not until he met Meredith Haney.
He told me that he had met somebody and they had just kind of been chatting and, enjoying getting to know each other. It seemed like a good thing, seemed like a positive thing for sure.
Calhoun says Davis had gone through a divorce, but the end of his marriage hadn't done anything to weaken his devotion as a father and a friend, even to the residents of the retirement home where he worked.
He was the most empathetic person I've ever met.
More than 4 months before Davis died, on the night of December 23, 2022, Meredith was at that club, celebrating her 39th birthday with her best friends. She says they were wearing their worst Christmas sweaters when the handsome stranger struck up a conversation.
Then I think he texted on Christmas Day, and then the next day, and then the next.
And you just kept on talking.
Mm-hmm.
Until meeting Davis, she says she'd been keeping her head down. Just about 6 months earlier, she had left her husband of 10 years, a local auto body shop owner named Bud Ackerman, and she was struggling to balance parenting their 3 kids and her job as a grammar school teacher. She says she knew getting involved with someone new would not be easy.
Was there any hesitancy about moving forward with this?
There was.
She says first Davis wanted to make sure she had no intention of reconciling her marriage.
He didn't want to be the reason that, we didn't get our family back together. So we made sure from the get-go that that wasn't going to be an issue. And it just happened.
They would have less than 6 months together.
Could you start to guess what may have happened, how it was hit?
The night of Davis's death, at the site, investigator Patrick Durkin noticed something beyond the strangeness of the crashed car and Davis's distance from it. There was an oil slick in the road.
It's still here.
Just over a year later, it's still here, but there was a number of footprints and some tire tracks that were leading away from this oil stain.
And what did that tell you when you saw it?
Well, we knew that there was some type of impact to the vehicle, and then we knew there was oil and tire marks that left from here.
It looked like evidence from the vehicle that hit Davis.
You guys are looking around, and you realize the oil continues?
You could see it was very obvious that there was tire marks that had gone back down the road and kind of turned around.
Back where the tire tracks seemed to show a vehicle had turned around, investigators had found oil spatters on a streetlight post.
It was about maybe this high.
And from there was a trail of oil that had led down the road into the distance.
It's breadcrumbs, basically.
In a manner of speaking.
We just have to do the investigation and see what evidence is there and see where it leads us to. There was a trail that led from the incident location.
Investigator Ronnie Powell says by the time authorities started following that oil trail from the crash site, they had a solid hunch where it might lead. Davis McClendon's girlfriend, Meredith Haney, had told them she'd suspected where he had been going when he left her at the bar that night, to meet her estranged husband, Bud Ackerman. And it turns out the oily evidence led right to Ackerman's parents' house.
Garage is open.
He'd been living there since separating from Meredith about a year earlier.
Sheriff's office. Yes, sir.
Authorities' body cameras were rolling.
He kind of walked up and almost was expecting us.
Bud Ackerman and his father were both standing near the garage.
Are there some kids here?
Yeah.
Okay, whose kids are they?
Mine.
Yours and who?
My wife.
Okay.
Bud had spent the day with his 3 kids at a local festival. He and his wife Meredith had a custody arrangement, and it was his night with the kids. But in the driveway, authorities noticed his white Ford F-250 pickup.
That's wild.
With oil leaking from the undercarriage, they also noticed a crack in the grille and other evidence that suggested the vehicle had hit someone.
That's a palm mark.
Investigators turned to Bud.
Do you have your ID on you?
I do not.
Okay, just step over here for him.
Authorities say Bud told them he would not answer questions without his lawyer present. But from speaking with Meredith, they learned she had a contentious relationship with her soon-to-be ex-husband and came to suspect a jealous Bud Ackerman had mowed Davis McClendon down. Looking at the scene, they deduced Davis had been standing outside his BMW, as shown in this CBS News animation based on their investigation. They suspect Bud's pickup truck sideswiped the sedan and hit Davis, carrying him on the vehicle's grille and depositing his body across the road. Meredith says Bud had been upset since reaching out to her days earlier when he found out she was dating Davis.
He texted me.
What did he text you?
He said something about, Meredith, how could you?
What was your reaction to that text?
I think it was hurt. I felt bad because I just don't like to hurt people's feelings. I don't like people to be hurt. So I felt bad.
What had begun years earlier as a promising marriage that would bear 3 kids had fallen apart.
He was a good father. He was a really good dad.
Bud was from a prominent local family and he was a business owner, but Meredith says his work had become stressful.
I started to notice like some depression and things like that that I've never seen before.
She says he started drinking a lot, and the more he drank, she says, the more unpredictable he became.
There was screaming, cussing.
You felt threatened.
Absolutely.
Meredith says he never laid a hand on her, but destroyed her sense of self.
The house was never clean enough. There were never enough groceries. It was so loud and vulgar. It was very degrading.
Then, she says, she noticed her husband was starting to become paranoid. She remembers being in her closet one day and noticing a strange pillow.
He had cut a hole in it.
According to Meredith, there was a hidden camera inside.
And then I started finding more of them.
What other places did you find cameras?
Oh, there was one hidden in our dresser that faced the bed. Found one in a bush in the front yard. He put them in all the kids' rooms.
She says that was the last straw. They separated in the spring of 2022.
I could breathe. I could be me again.
Meredith says the separation seemed to help Bud too, that he'd stopped drinking and kept going to church with her and the kids. But by then she decided it was too late.
When I was done, I was done.
And starting again with someone new seemed like a distant dream, Meredith says, until that night Davis McClendon sauntered up and sat down in her life. They tried to keep things low-key at first. Meredith says she never wanted to rub Bud's nose in it.
So what did you all do?
We would go out of town.
But Meredith says they knew they couldn't sneak around forever, and it had started seeming like her new relationship with Davis was a forever kind of thing.
We talked about sitting on the porch, rocking chairs at 80, and it was just a different kind of relationship.
But after Bud found out, there were new complications.
He accused you of cheating,
Yeah,
even though you were weeks away from your divorce.
right.
Meredith says Bud actually called Davis and asked him to back off until the divorce was official.
What was Davis's reaction to that request?
I think he agreed. But then we talked about it and decided that was just giving him another little piece of control.
And on the night Davis died, she says Bud seemed out of control. Back at his parents' house, investigators now had a warrant and were finding more clues that Ackerman had been at the crash site.
Oily footprints. Oily footprints.
At about 6:30 a.m. on May 7th, 2023, Bud Ackerman was arrested. He would be charged with the murder of Davis McClendon.
We think there's enough evidence at the scene to prove of what occurred.
So by the end of the night, you already have someone in custody.
Yes.
What's left to do?
But that's just the beginning.
Because it turns out Bud Ackerman did have a story to tell. He says Davis was standing near the middle of a dark road, approximately shown in this CBS News animation. Bud says he didn't see Davis until it was too late, that hitting him had been an accident. And Bud's team says they can prove it. Investigators are confident they could prove Bud Ackerman's truck had hit and killed Davis McClendon, but they knew proving Ackerman had done it on purpose might be harder.
Building a case starts from that night.
And when investigators looked at that night, they learned Bud Ackerman had been tracking Davis and Meredith's whereabouts for hours.
He was trying to find them that night, and he was not happy about this whole situation.
Using security video, phone records, and even data from Bud's own truck, authorities built a timeline. They began with Meredith's phone, Lieutenant Matthew Womack of the Greenwood County Sheriff's Office.
We were able to extract the information, such as the calls and the texts.
A slew of calls and text messages Bud had made to Meredith leading up to the collision. At 8:54 p.m., Bud texts Meredith, "Why do you hate me? I just don't understand." She doesn't respond to him. She's out with Davis at a local restaurant.
We went to dinner at Break on the Lake.
You see Davis and Meredith, having dinner.
And being interrupted by Bud's attempts to reach her.
What was the FaceTime conversation like?
Where are you? Who are you with? Why are you doing this to me?
Did you tell him where you were?
I feel like at some point in the conversation, either he could tell where I was because of what's around me, or I finally did tell him. It was one or the other.
So at that point, he knows that you're out with Davis.
Mm-hmm. While Meredith continued her date with Davis, security cameras catch Bud Ackerman at 10:40 p.m., arriving at a popular Greenwood club called Key West.
You can see Bud, he's talking to people, interacting, consuming alcohol.
The video shows Bud spent about an hour and a half at Key West, then called Meredith again.
How did he sound on the phone?
Intoxicated.
What's an intoxicated Bud sound like?
Vulgar.
Soon after midnight, Ackerman had left Key West. About a half hour later, cameras show Bud's truck circling in front of Break on the Lake. But by then, Meredith and Davis were no longer at the restaurant.
You can see his vehicle drive through the parking lot as if he's looking for him.
Lieutenant Womack says before long, investigators would learn just how far Bud Ackerman had gone that night to find Meredith and Davis. Though Ackerman himself wasn't talking, critical information would emerge from another digital witness, his truck.
It's a box about this big that goes into the backside of the dash.
Womack says in some cars and trucks, the infotainment systems, as they're known, store detailed information about how the vehicles are being driven. We're in a similar model to Bud's Ford F-250 pickup.
So on Bud's vehicle, they were able to pull a significant amount of information. This is just a little snippet. You're talking just in a 24-hour time period, it's over 3,000 events.
Events including snap measurements of speed, acceleration, and brake pressure. Bud's onboard computer even pinged public Wi-Fi's it passed. Investigators learned that Bud had actually driven by Meredith's house and onto Davis McClendon's street that night. But while he was driving around looking for them, ironically, they had moved to the Key West club he had just left.
When Davis decides to call Bud, he walked out the back of the bar.
It was 12:51 a.m.
A few minutes passed, and I went out there to check on him, and he was gone.
Did he think he could bring the temperature down?
Mm-hmm.
Records show Davis called her minutes later.
And what was that conversation?
Where are you? And that's when he told me that he was going to meet Bud.
Womack says other infotainment system data show that at a bit past 1 a.m, Davis and Bud had their fatal encounter.
And we can tell there was actually an event at 1:11 a.m. on May the 7th.
They say Ackerman hit the brakes hard.
We could narrow it down to tenths of seconds of when the collision occurred.
And according to the computer, seconds after the collision, Ackerman's truck had stopped.
At that point in time, Bud's opening the door. He opens the door before he shifts it to park.
Womack thinks Ackerman got out of his truck, which was probably leaking from the collision. Remember that puddle of oil in the road near the victim?
Then he closes the door, then he gets back in, and then it's shifted to drive at that point in time.
Then, say authorities, Ackerman turns his truck around near the lamppost, roughly as you see in this CBS News demonstration based on their investigation. He then drives away, leaking an oil trail all the way to his parents' driveway.
Right here, his phone becomes unavailable. The ignition turned off and it disconnected from his device.
What does that tell you?
That's when he got home and got out. It started to paint a very clear picture.
But Ackerman's attorney, Jack Swirling, paints a different picture.
I don't think he intended to run Davis McClendon over. There's no indication that he's an aggressive or violent individual.
Sheriff's office.
Nor, says Swirling, is there much to indicate his client was drunk that night.
Can I get you to step with me over here for me, please? All right.
None of the cops who arrested him reported he seemed tipsy.
The only one that said he was intoxicated was Meredith.
Was he stalking them that night?
I think he was trying to find out, confirm that they were together. He wanted to talk to her.
According to Swirling, Meredith and Davis had betrayed McClendon's promise to Bud to stand down until the Ackermans' marriage was officially over.
She couldn't wait another month, and she's out with this guy, and she's cheating on her husband. They are still legally married. South Carolina law calls that adultery.
And Swirling says the night Davis died, he let Bud Ackerman's repeated calls and text messages to Meredith get under his skin.
Davis got upset about it, and that's what led to them having this meeting. Bud thought they were going to meet and talk.
He says Bud had suggested an innocent and safe place for it to happen.
They were supposed to meet at Bud's parents' house, which is about half a mile from that location.
Swirling says Ackerman's children were sleeping there that night, so attacking Davis would have been the last thing on his client's mind.
You wouldn't meet at your parents' house if you were angry and threatening and ready to kill somebody.
He says it was Davis who selected the deserted intersection as a new location. And remember how Davis was found without his shirt on that night? Well, Swirling says he believes Davis took it off to prepare for a confrontation.
He was ready to fight.
Swirling insists Bud Ackerman meant no harm that night, and Bud is about to tell that story to a jury.
Your name?
William Gray Ackerman, Jr. I also go by Bud.
Good morning, everybody. We are on the record in the state versus William Bud Ackerman.
Prosecutors are determined to prove it was no accident that Bud Ackerman hit Davis McClendon the night he died. So in September of 2024, Assistant Attorneys General John Conrad and John Metters.
He intentionally drove his car into the body of Davis McClendon.
Start the case off with a bang.
Bam! And that's what this case is about.
They'll argue Ackerman couldn't stand the fact that his estranged wife was seeing someone, and Bud was searching for Meredith and Davis all over town.
Bud Ackerman was not going to let Davis McClendon be with Meredith.
That's your house right there. Yes, sir.
Metters and Conrad lead with their strongest evidence. There are actually time-stamped videos from the neighbors' doorbell cameras at the moment of the crash that killed Davis. It shows what they say is Bud's Ford F-250 driving through the frame. Seconds later on the video, what sounds like a crash. And seconds after that, a series of muffled sounds.
What did you hear? I heard somebody yelling.
Prosecutors argue it's Bud Ackerman's voice, yelling at Davis McClendon after running him down.
What it sounded like to me was, what do you want to talk about now?
Bud's yelling unheavenly expletives. He said to Davis as he was lying on the ground. I think he was glad he was dead.
But Bud Ackerman's defense attorney, Jack Swirling, argues the audio is too garbled to prove anything.
I've listened to it several times now, and I don't believe you could conclude 100% that that is exactly what he said.
The prosecutor then calls Megan McGovern, the Ackermans' babysitter and friend, to describe the moment she'd seen Davis's body through traumatized teenage eyes.
He had blood coming out of his ears and his nose, and I'm not exactly sure if it was coming out of his mouth or not, because I mean, there's just blood everywhere from his nose and everything.
But their star witness is the woman at the center of both men's affection, Meredith Haney, who testifies with the date-night security videos as a guide.
Is that you?
Yes, sir.
She tells the jury Bud Ackerman called her when she and Davis were at break on the lake.
Did you think he was trying to find you?
I did worry, yes.
And kept calling after they got to Key West Club.
Is that a call from the defendant, Bud Ackerman?
Yes, sir.
Did you reject that call?
Yes.
It's 18 seconds later, you get another call.
Yes, sir.
Well, what'd you think about all these calls coming in?
I was getting very frustrated and angry, and it was getting obsessive. It was getting scary.
And she says by the time Davis McClendon left her at the Key West Club after midnight.
And is that Davis McClendon leaving the bar?
Yes.
She was worried Bud might be volatile. So when Davis later called to tell her he was going to meet with Ackerman, she says she wanted to go check on the situation in person, and makes clear to the jury that when she saw the scene, she had little doubt who'd killed her boyfriend.
I dove back into Meg's car because I thought that the only way that Bud would have ever killed somebody would have been to shoot.
Objection. Don't go.
The judge sustains the defense's objection, but Meredith continues.
I was scared that he was still out there.
Okay, Mr. Swirling, any cross-examination?
I have no questions.
Can I step down, ma'am?
Your Honor, State calls Special Agent Brian Hudak.
Digital forensics expert Brian Hudak tells the jury about data in the infotainment system of Ackerman's pickup, including some that show Bud was driving in exactly the right place.
In Greenwood at the intersection of Avid and Sawgrass.
At exactly the right time.
Between
1:11:31 and 1:11:32.
To be implicated in the deadly collision. He suggests they can even tell the moment of impact.
there's something that causes this truck to deaccelerate very quickly, correct?
Correct.
And Hudak says the evidence shows Ackerman was going 25 miles per hour.
And the amount of detail that that truck had on what Bud did that night is simply breathtaking.
Ford vehicles completely on the wrong side of the road when it strikes the BMW.
Collision reconstruction expert Corporal Christopher Bratcher testifies the dents show Bud's speeding pickup sideswiped Davis's BMW sedan, as shown in that CBS News animation based on the prosecution's theory. They say Bud was aiming at Davis, who was standing near the driver's door when he was hit, and that the truck kept going with Davis on the grill until he fell off where authorities found him. But Jack Swirling argues much of the same evidence shows hitting Davis was an accident.
We maintain that Mr. Ackerman did not act intentionally in this case.
He says Bud Ackerman had no idea Davis was standing outside his car, and calls auto forensics expert Jonathan Nelson to testify that given Ackerman's speed, in the dark, over a slope in the road and into the parked BMW's headlight beams, he wouldn't have seen Davis McClendon standing in the road until at most 2.5 seconds before the collision.
Or would a person have sufficient opportunity to avoid impact?
I think most people would have little to no opportunity to begin to try to avoid.
And Swirling says Davis wasn't standing right next to his car when he was hit, but further out towards the center of the road, and that Ackerman swerved to his left into the BMW to get around him, as shown in this CBS News animation based on the defense's theory.
He's trying to avoid hitting him.
Wouldn't you swerve the other way?
Why he didn't go right, I can't answer that.
Swirling knows there may be only one person who can.
Call Bud Ackerman.
All right, come around to the stand, please, sir.
Ackerman's attorney begins by trying to show the jury his client was Meredith's long-suffering but devoted husband.
Did you love her?
I did very much.
He admits he was angry at Meredith, but says he only wanted to talk to her and agreed to meet Davis to talk to him too.
Do you have any intention to hurt him?
I did not.
Ackerman says he hadn't realized how fast he was going and that he was only trying to pull up next to Davis to talk and didn't see McClendon standing in the road until the last moment.
What action did you take, if any, to avoid hitting the person?
I jerked my truck as hard as I could to the left to try to hit his car to stop the motion of my truck from going forward.
But on cross-examination, he admits something that undercuts his claims of innocence that night. He had never called 911.
I panicked.
You panicked?
Instead, he left the scene and drove to his parents' house and told them what had happened. But they never called authorities either.
I've seen so many people react in abnormal ways in all the cases I've handled that I've come to expect those kind of things.
In closings, prosecutor Metters argues Ackerman is a murderer with a truck as his weapon.
This might as well be a drive-by shooting with a gun.
And he says the Ford pickup's infotainment system proves it.
This is Bud's brain. This is malice. This is intent.
The state has not proven that Mr. Ackerman acted with malice or with the intent.
It's the highest possible bar, and the defense insists the state has not proven its case.
That Mr. Ackerman is entitled to a verdict of not guilty.
This is judgment day. It's verdict day.
You never know what a jury's going to do. You got 12 people making the decision.
Have you reached a verdict in this case? Ladies and gentlemen, it's my understanding that the jury has reached a verdict.
For the Ackerman jury, 6 days of testimony and evidence boiled down to a deliberation less than a half-hour long.
State of South Carolina versus William Gray Bud Ackerman.
Did you have a feeling about what that verdict might be?
Yes. Yeah, a quick verdict like that is not good. Not good.
We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant guilty.
Bud Ackerman is guilty of the murder of Davis McClendon.
It was the right verdict.
I mean, I thought it would be fast. Not that fast.
Not just fast, but too fast to be thought through, says Bud Ackerman's attorney, Jack Swirling.
I don't think the jury considered everything that was presented to them.
They need a lot of time to stew over the evidence. The evidence was clear and obvious.
Damning evidence of what Bud Ackerman did, say Davis McClendon's friends, and equally damning evidence, they say, of what Bud Ackerman never did.
Our friend laid there in the road.
They still can't wrap their head around why nobody in the Ackerman family ever called 911.
Somebody should have done the right thing.
At sentencing, right after the verdict, Davis McClendon's son demands accountability from the Ackermans.
It is time for this spoiled, evil individual and this spoiled, evil family in Greenwood to finally gain some repercussions for their actions. Thank you.
A lot's been said about why we didn't call 911.
Bud Ackerman's father tries to explain his own lack of action by saying he was too disoriented to know what to do at that hour of the night when his son woke him with the news. The judge's sentence is devastating to the defendant.
Mr. Ackerman, if you please stand, sir. Sentence of the court is, Mr. Ackerman, you be committed to the State Department Corrections period of 45 years.
It looks like the end of the road for Bud Ackerman.
I know that where he is where he's supposed to be.
But it may allow for a new beginning for Meredith Haney.
I was worried that if he only got 5 or 10 years, that I'd never get to start a new life because I'd be scared for when he got out.
With their father unlikely to get out of prison for decades, she's determined to spare her children from the impact of that horrible night. As a single mom, she leans on friends and family.
How are the kids doing?
We'll make it through.
Looking back, she believes Bud Ackerman really wanted to target her that night, and that she's only alive because he found Davis McClendon first.
Davis saved my life.
You really feel that way?
Absolutely.
If true, Meredith Haney owes her life, however challenging, to the new man she had once hoped to share it with.
How would you like Davis to be remembered?
As a hero, for the way he treated people, for his empathy, for his heart. He was just a good person.
CBS next Saturday. A soldier suspected of killing his young wife. He's been trained on how to kill. Goes on the run.
He just disappeared off the face of the map.
With his 17-year-old girlfriend.
If he was willing to kill his own wife, there's no telling what kind of danger Hannah Thompson would have been in.
48 Hours is all new. CBS next Saturday, 10/9 Central, and streaming on Paramount+.
On 13th of June, 1993, I was on call as a team leader for our crime scene team. We had pagers then, no cell phones, and I got a page. It was a sergeant requesting our assistance on the 21st floor of this high-rise apartment building.
When you entered into the apartment, you didn't really see anything. You wouldn't have known that a crime had occurred. When you went a little further and you ended up going into the bedroom, it was catastrophic.
When I proceeded to where the body was, on the side of the bed, I looked down, and I could see the imprint in blood that looked like a left foot and a right foot. It's an actual bare foot. I mean, wow.
I turned the TV on. I saw the apartment. They said they just found a young woman in her early 30s. Oh my, I just got chills all over. Don't tell me that was Jean. I called the coroner's place and he said, "Are you all alone? You better get somebody over there with you because it was your daughter." I couldn't believe it.
Jeannie Childs had defensive wounds on her hands when they found her. She had been stabbed at least 65 times, including after she had died. Investigators took DNA evidence at the time. They could not find who it belonged to. And they hit a dead end at some point and moved on. And it wasn't until 2015 that a cold case unit reopened the case. A DNA profile was uploaded into myheritage.com, and they found what could be a match. Jerry Westrom is a husband, a father of 3, a businessman. He attended church. He was a hockey dad. Police expect Western to be charged with murder by noon tomorrow.
Jerry doesn't have a demeanor of being a violent person.
Have you ever seen him lose his temper?
No. I believe it's at my toes, he's not capable. Okay. He didn't do it.
There was DNA from other individuals that did not belong to Jerry Westrom, but clearly belonged to a male source. We know that there were experts that viewed multiple footprints, and they're in her blood.
The person who put the footprint down had to step in wet blood, and it had to be after she was stabbed or bleeding.
How important did those footprints in blood become in this case?
Without the footprints, we would not be sitting here. I think that the footprints defined the path of this case.
Minnesota crime scene investigators captured this footage when they got their first look inside a high-rise apartment in Minneapolis.
The camera's pointing west at this time.
According to police reports, at around 5:30 p.m., June 13, 1993, a tenant reported water seeping into their apartment. A building caretaker and a security guard were called to check it out and discovered the water was coming from apartment 2104.
They went into the apartment and they found that the shower was still running and causing all this flooding next door.
After the shower was turned off, they came upon a gruesome scene in the bedroom. 35-year-old Jeannie Child's body was partially under the bed. That's when police were called to investigate.
This was a violent, bloody crime scene. This is one of the bloodiest that I'd been to.
Retired forensic scientist Bart Epstein says carefully documenting that scene was crucial. Blood stains and blood spatter tell a story.
Yes, they sure can. In this case, we could establish that Jeannie Childs was hit in front of the bathroom door.
Epstein says Jeannie then moved into the bathroom. She was stabbed and slashed dozens of times.
She was down on the floor smearing blood along that area.
While the shower had been turned off earlier, investigators noticed water was still running from the sink faucet.
There was a lot of activity going on there. Why was the sink faucet still dripping? Was he trying to clean up?
Jeannie apparently made it back to her bedroom, where her body was found.
The blood wasn't confined to just the area where she was. The blood was on the walls, the blood was on the comforter, the blood was on the floor.
Julie Rendelman is a defense attorney and legal consultant for 48 Hours.
It leads one to believe that a struggle happened, that she was fighting to save her own life.
The living room appeared untouched. A sitcom was still playing on the TV. There was no evidence of forced entry. If Jeannie knew her killer, what could have prompted so much violence?
This, to me, seems like more rage. Someone who got upset at the time that the crime was committed.
Jeannie's mother, Betty Ekman, was watching television news when she saw a report about a woman who had been murdered.
I called my husband at work. I said, I just seen them on the news taking a stretcher out of that building that she lives in.
Betty soon got the news no mother wants to hear. The victim was her eldest child.
I just wanted to hold her. I couldn't believe it.
Betty says she spoke with her daughter the day before her murder. Jeannie, she says, wasn't expecting visitors because she was nursing a toothache. What were her plans that weekend?
She went to the emergency room. She was in so much pain. Jeannie always had problems with her teeth, and I don't know why. So I said, let me come and get you. No, Mom, stop worrying about me.
Jeannie was dead by Sunday afternoon. As the crime investigation continued, authorities focused on gathering evidence: a blue washcloth, a red t-shirt, a bath towel, blood scrapings from the sink, along with a comforter, were collected and taken for DNA testing. Investigators observed dishes in the kitchen sink and a knife in the drying rack. Did you take that knife in?
Did not take that knife in. I looked at it, and there was no apparent blood on there. We never found any actual weapon there that was a murder weapon.
Investigators were able to identify some bloodstains found in the stairwell near Jeannie's 21st floor apartment. Did any of the blood belong to the victim,
Yes.
Jeannie Childs? Do you think it's possible that the person who stabbed her was also cut?
Well, it could be. That's why we took the samples.
Epstein says whoever murdered Jeannie Childs unknowingly left behind something investigators rarely encounter: bloody, bare footprints under the bedroom window.
That drew my attention right away. And right next to it, I see the socked foot of Jeannie Childs.
The footprints were dusted with black powder at the crime scene. When you first saw these, you said, because she's wearing socks, these belong to the killer.
That would be my feeling. That's most likely the perpetrator's footprint. If there's the friction ridge on the feet, like the friction ridge on your fingers, there's potential to identify the person's foot that made that. That was very, very significant.
I knew that God was going to make sure that I was going to know what happened. Everyone said she looked like me.
These are pretty precious. Very few pictures I have of us together.
Cindy Blummer remembers the deep loss she felt after the murder of her big sister, Jeannie.
A lot of sadness when you wanted to pick up the phone and call your sister. I needed my sister. I wanted to talk to her, wondering what actually took place. Who did this?
Although her sister was 12 years older, Jeannie's playful spirit made an impression on Cindy growing up.
Lionel Richie was one of her favorite. And as soon as she would hear him play, her fingers would start snapping and she would dance around.
But those good times were few and far between. Betty Ekman says she first noticed a change in her eldest daughter when she was a preteen.
She kind of lost her way when she was probably around 12, 13.
Betty says it wasn't until decades later that Jeannie claimed she had been abused by a male relative. Jeannie started running away from home.
I took my life in my own hands many a times to track her down. I could have been killed, but I had my Great Dane and a gun.
Would you sometimes find her?
Oh, yeah. When she would come home, she was like a cat on a hot tin roof. She was so antsy, she couldn't stay very long.
As the time passed, she feared her daughter was using drugs and soon learned how Jeannie was making ends meet. And what did your daughter do?
Prostitution. I just hoped and prayed that she would stop.
At one point, it seemed she settled down long enough to get married, but her family says it didn't last long. Soon after, she married again to a man with children, and Jeannie became a stepmom.
And they depended on her. She was the only mother they really knew.
Even when Jeannie split with their father, she remained in the children's lives.
They needed anything, they knew how to get a hold of her. She was really good that way.
At the time of her murder, she was living with a man named Arthur Gray at that apartment complex. After Jeannie's murder, he became a person of interest.
Investigators immediately looked at whether Arthur Gray was involved in the murder.
Retired FBI agent Chris Bogers would later join the investigation. According to police reports, Jeannie, who was a sex worker, claimed she worked for Gray, and there was a history of violence between them. At the crime scene, authorities found hairs stuck to Jeannie's left hand, and one of those hairs matched Gray. But Boker says the case against Gray started to fall apart pretty quickly.
Arthur Gray, as a resident of that apartment, it makes sense that his hairs would be throughout the bedroom.
And Arthur Gray said he wasn't even in town, but on a motorcycle trip in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the weekend Jeannie was murdered.
He had a really solid alibi that he was out of town that weekend that was corroborated by others.
Authorities compared the unknown bloody footprints in the apartment to Gray's footprints and determined they weren't his.
Do you know how many other possible suspects, persons of interest, whose footprints were compared to those left in Jeannie's apartment?
There were multiple people whose footprints were compared to the footprints that were left in Jeannie's apartment. You could see that in the case file, that a lot of effort was put in attempting to solve Jeannie's case.
According to the case file, on the day of the murder, a witness in the apartment building told police she saw Jeannie with a tall blonde man wearing a trench coat.
We had no way to track down who that may or may not have been.
Investigators never found the man. Despite efforts to find Jeannie's killer, the case slowed to a crawl. Months turned into years, and then decades.
How often would you call the police trying to get an update to find out if they had anything new on this case?
Many times as I could, but I never let a year go by without reminding them.
In 2015, the Minneapolis Police Department began digging deeper into unsolved cases, and Jeannie Child's murder was one of them. Jeannie's family had no idea, but investigators were hoping science would help them solve the case.
Technology is so much more refined and rigorous than it was in 1993.
Agent Boker says they discovered that a blood sample found near Jeannie's blood in the stairwell of her apartment building had matched to a man named John Eswine. In 2015, investigators interviewed Eswine, who was in prison for violating probation on a drunk driving offense.
Do you have any idea why your DNA would be in that building, your blood would be in that building?
No.
Okay.
My blood was in that building?
Yeah.
If you found my blood somewhere, all I can think of is that I must have fallen down somewhere. And
Eswine told investigators he was in the building once in 1991, 2 years before Jeannie's murder.
He easily volunteered his DNA. He also allowed his footprints to be taken. Then his footprints were compared to the bloody footprints in Jeannie's bedroom.
According to a lab report, the footprints were inconclusive, and Eswine's DNA was not found inside Jeannie's apartment. The mystery only deepened. Investigators knew from the case file that there were DNA profiles discovered at the crime scene that had never matched to anyone. Andrea Fea, a forensic scientist with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, performed additional testing on the evidence that was collected back in 1993. And she noticed something unusual about one of the unknown DNA profiles.
That DNA profile repeated itself throughout the crime scene.
It was on the comforter, it was on the blue towel, it was found on the blue washcloth.
And the red T-shirt?
Correct.
And on the sink?
Yes. Those were the only areas that we tested that ended up matching each other, essentially.
Investigators then turned to investigative genetic genealogy for answers. The unknown DNA profile was submitted to genealogy websites, including myheritage.com.
The forensic genealogist indicated that she had a match, potentially 2 brothers here in Minnesota.
And one of the brothers was a man named Jerry Westrom.
He was a well-respected member of the community. People were surprised.
More than 25 years after Jeannie Childs was murdered, unknown DNA at the crime scene was matched to 52-year-old Jerry Westrom. What did you know about him?
He was living north of Minneapolis, St. Paul, that he was working for a company up in St. Cloud, Minnesota area. He'd been a businessman.
Retired FBI agent Chris Bokers says the married father of 3 wasn't hard to find.
Had a Facebook account that we could follow. He was leading a seemingly normal family life.
Westrom had grown up in rural Minnesota.
He and I were on a 4-H trip when we were 14 to Washington, D.C.
Wayne Triplett and Jerry Westrom were farm kids. They later became college buddies. And when Wayne got married,
he was one of the groomsmen in our wedding.
That means he was a good friend of yours.
Yes, that's true. He got along well with a lot of people. Very low-key gentleman, easily can make friends with people.
Westrom and his family were well respected in Isanti, Minnesota, about 40 miles away from Minneapolis. They owned a Sears store, and in the year 2000, Westrom built his own Field of Dreams, a convenience store and gas station known as Westrom's Corner. But in 2008, the turbulent economy took it all away.
Was that tough on him to lose? Westrom's Corner?
I think it was tough on him. It'd be tough on anybody.
Westrom returned to his roots. He began raising organic corn and soybeans and cultivating a business selling crop insurance.
He's a very good salesperson. He understands the need to fill the need. He understands how to communicate, and people have to be comfortable with you to close on business.
Wayne never imagined that the even-tempered friend he's known since their teenage years would become the prime suspect in a violent murder case.
Did he have any history of violent crimes?
No apparent criminal history involving violent crime.
Jeannie was stabbed over 60 times, and here's this man, no history of violence, and this is the guy who might have killed her?
Well, it gave some pause that that level of violence and that type of crime, we kind of expected it would be somebody that maybe had been arrested multiple times. So yes, that does give a little pause.
Investigators were anxious to confirm that the unknown crime scene DNA was indeed Jerry Westrom's. But to do that, they needed to track him down.
We needed to obtain DNA from Jerry in order to compare it to the unknown DNA from the scene.
Forensic scientist Andrea Feya.
And what did you tell them would be the best DNA if they could get it?
Best DNA is something that has been in a person's mouth, like if they drank out of a drinking container, a straw, if they spit out chewing gum, anything that could have saliva on it.
Why is saliva the ideal? Why did you say, get something that had touched his mouth?
There's a lot of DNA in saliva.
Westrom, a devoted hockey dad, frequently attended his daughter's college games. In January 2019, Westrom traveled to a game in Wisconsin. Agent Bokers, along with his partner, surreptitiously followed him there.
Westrom went out to the lobby concession stand and made a food order. We watched him sit at the table and eat his order, and when he finished, he took a napkin and he wiped his mouth.
Westrom tossed that napkin and food container in the garbage can, and when he returned to the rink, Agent Bokers made his move.
I was gloved. I just reached down and got the container, and we bagged it up for evidence.
I tested and got a DNA profile from that napkin and compared it to the unidentified profile on the comforter and the blue towel.
And what was the result?
They were consistent with each other.
A month later, in February 2019, Jerry Westrom was arrested and charged with the murder of Jeannie Childs. As you sit here right now, Wayne, do you believe that Jerry Westrom is the one who killed Jeannie Childs?
Definite no, not a chance.
Definite no.
Definite no, not a chance.
In a videotaped interview at the jail, Agent Bokers and his partner questioned Westrom.
Does this lady look familiar to you at all? Okay, her name is Jeannie Childs. Okay. And she was found in her building, in her apartment, deceased. Do you know anything about that at all? No. Okay, do you think you would have ever had sex with her? I doubt it. In 93, would you have been with a prostitute? No.
WCCO TV senior investigative reporter Jennifer Mayerly.
He doesn't give much in the interview, but what he doesn't say almost says more.
What do you mean?
He doesn't ask any questions about what happened, about why he's there, about why they're looking at him.
Jerry Westrom had no history of violent crime, but it seems he had been keeping a few secrets from his friends. Westrom had told Wayne about 2 DWI arrests, but never shared he had been arrested twice for soliciting sex workers. You didn't know anything?
No.
What was your reaction?
It was hard to understand. That's the hard pill to swallow, meaning how does a person with a good family and loving wife have the need for solicitation? What's going on there?
Investigators questioned Westrom for 11 minutes until he asked for a lawyer. He was then handcuffed and spent the night in jail.
And the following morning, we went to the jail with Minneapolis Crime Lab personnel, and they obtained his footprints.
48 Hours legal consultant Julie Rendelman says the footprints were important because Westrom's DNA was not the only DNA recovered there.
DNA that was recovered was from multiple individuals. If you don't have anything else, that in and of itself does not establish beyond a reasonable doubt that Jerry Westrom is the person that committed this crime.
For more than 25 years, Betty Ekman had prayed for a break in her daughter's unsolved murder case. In February 2019, her prayers were answered.
I got a phone call and he said, I'm the detective that worked on your daughter's case. And I said, okay, what's going on? We found him. And I got goosebumps all over me and I said, are you sure? He said, yes, we got him.
But when Cindy Blummer learned the name of the suspect in her sister's murder, she had trouble believing it.
I said, no way. No way.
Jerry Westrom was a familiar face who lived in their town of Isanti, Minnesota.
I'd seen Jerry because our boys played hockey. He's tall, he kind of stands out. He also owned the business, the gas station.
The hockey dad and local businessman was now charged with murder. Westrom was later indicted by a grand jury and pleaded not guilty. Westrom's DNA, according to forensic scientist Andrea Fea, found on the comforter and towel in the bathroom, was identified as semen. But she says her team couldn't determine the type of DNA that she says Westrom left on the red t-shirt, the bathroom sink, and the washcloth. You can't say definitively that his blood or any other kind of DNA was found at the scene. You know it's his DNA, but you don't know what kind. Is that correct?
Correct. I don't know how it was deposited, essentially.
You say DNA to general Joe Q public, well, that's a slam dunk.
Wayne Triplett, however, has questions about how and when the DNA was left there.
There's no timestamp on DNA.
Despite advances in DNA technology, there's no way to know how long Westrum's DNA had been there. And Wayne says the evidence only suggests one thing.
That just doesn't mysteriously show up. He had to be there.
So you think he probably was in that apartment at some point?
You know, you can't run from that evidence. He had to have been there. Don't get there by accident.
You don't believe he was there the day that Jeannie Childs was murdered?
I don't.
48 Hours legal consultant Julie Rendelman says the evidence in this case does raise questions. According to lab reports, there was other DNA from semen discovered on Jeannie's purple panties that does not match Westrum. Whose DNA it is remains even today a mystery. And that wasn't all.
There was DNA from other individuals that did not belong to Jerry Westrum, but clearly belonged to a male source.
Rendelman points to that DNA found in the stairwell, close to bloodstains identified as belonging to Jeannie Childs.
Jerry Westrum's DNA is not in the stairwell, but we know that there's at least one other person whose DNA blood is found in that stairwell.
Remember, that stairwell DNA matched John Eswine. When investigators interviewed him, he couldn't recall how his blood ended up in the stairwell, not far from Jeannie Childs' apartment on the 21st floor.
His answers were a bit peculiar, I found. And the reason I say that is because he actually described being there one time.
And why does that bother you?
So it bothers me because how the heck would he remember when he's interviewed all these years later that he was there, but only there once? And the one time he says he was there was years before the murder. It felt a bit convenient.
We reached out to John Eswine for comment, but he didn't respond. He has never been charged in this case. Rendelman also points out that before Jerry Westrum's DNA was identified at the crime scene, authorities had discovered a mixture of DNA types on the comforter. According to a 2012 lab report, a man named James Luther Carlton couldn't be excluded as one of the contributors.
We know this is an individual that had committed multiple sex crimes in the past.
And what makes Carlton so significant? A little more than a year after Jeannie Childs' murder in July 1994.
Sometime between last Thursday and Monday, someone entered this one-bedroom uptown apartment and murdered Jody Dover.
26-year-old hospital worker Jody Dover was stabbed to death in her Minneapolis apartment. Jody's murder was eerily similar to Jeannie's murder. Jody's killer had also left behind bloody footprints. Authorities arrested Carlton and determined a footprint found inside Jody Dover's apartment belonged to him. He was convicted of her murder in 1995 and is serving a life sentence. 48 Hours can't confirm if he was ever questioned around the time of Jeannie Childs' murder. We reached out to Carlton. He declined our interview request. Carlton's criminal history was a red flag for Westrum's defense team. Attorney Stephen Meshbesher told our CBS station, WCCO, that it was a rush to judgment in this case.
You need to do the investigation first. Find out what the facts are, find out what the evidence is, and then determine the charge. Now they're charging it first.
Were the footprints Jerry Westrum's? As both sides prepared for trial, it became clear that it would all come down to this unique evidence.
In Minnesota, here, people are not committing crimes a lot of times with their socks and shoes off.
Mark Ulrich, a supervisor with the Minneapolis Police Forensic Division, examined the footprints. He says he focused on the friction-ridged skin the arrangement of ridges and furrows unique to every person.
Friction ridge skin is found on your fingers, your palms, and the soles of your feet.
7 bloody footprints were photographed and labeled A through G. Defense attorneys hired their own forensic scientist, Alicia McCarthy, a professor at Thomas College in Waterville, Maine, to analyze the bloody footprints for them.
You call this case a beast.
It was a beast. It was definitely very challenging.
What conclusions would the experts reach? Was Jerry Westrom just a customer who had left his DNA in Jeannie Child's apartment previously? Or was he the one who stabbed her to death more than 60 times? Investigators believe the bloody footprints found in her apartment would provide the answer.
That looks like a left foot.
Correct. I completed the reference files.
Mark Ulrich at the Minneapolis Police Lab was tasked with comparing the crime scene prints to Westrom. He determined that 4 of the 7 prints were suitable for comparison. One of them, he says, revealed the impression of a left foot. He labeled the heel E1 and an area below the big toe as E2. When Ulrich analyzed it, this was his conclusion.
E1 and E2 were identified to Mr. Jerry Westrom.
And he says there was more.
This one, B.
That one was identified to the right foot of Mr. Jerry Westrom.
Ulrich believed that all 4 prints, E1, E2, B, and another left footprint he labeled D1, belonged to Westrom. As the trial date approached, forensic scientist Alicia McCarthy, who had been hired by the defense, was asked to verify Ulrich's work.
They wanted me to come in and look and double check the work that was done by the Minneapolis lab.
McCarthy believed that only the print labeled E2, the area below the left big toe, was suitable for comparison.
This is the crime scene photo.
This is E2.
During her analysis, she began comparing E2 to the footprints of alternate suspects and didn't get anywhere.
I was sort of in limbo for about a year where I was comparing to other people. And then I said, I'm inconclusive. I can't say it's these people. I can't say it's not these people.
McCarthy showed us what unique characteristics she was looking for.
We have what we call a recurve. Yes, it comes down and recurves back up. And for a friction ridge examiner, that's pretty exciting.
When she compared E2 to Jerry Westrom's footprints, she followed the curves and finally...
And who do you believe left that footprint at the crime scene?
That was Jerry Westrom's left foot.
And you're sure of that?
Positive.
McCarthy agreed with Mark Ulrich. E2, the small area below the left big toe, had been placed there by Jerry Westrom. But she disagreed with Ulrich on the other 3 footprints.
I went through and did the comparisons that Mark had made identifications with. I didn't agree with him.
She believed those 3 prints didn't have enough detail.
There wasn't enough for that very high threshold to say an identification and go to court in front of a jury and tell them that this impression belongs to Jerry Westrom.
That's her decision, and I have no qualms about what she did. I just know the quality of my work, and I know what I stand by.
When McCarthy determined E2 belonged to Westrom, she was immediately released by his defense team. Both experts would then testify for the prosecution.
Opening statements today in the trial of a hockey dad accused of a murder nearly 30 years ago.
In August 2022, Jerry Westrom went on trial for Jeannie Child's murder. He had been out on bond. The judge ruled there'd be no cameras in the courtroom. 48 Hours asked Westrom and his family for on-camera interviews, but they declined.
Jerry's wife and 3 kids were there for most of the trial.
Jennifer Merrily covered the trial.
Jerry and his wife would walk into the Hennepin County Government Center holding hands.
In the courtroom, prosecutors painted a different picture. They said the evidence points to Jerry Westrom as the killer. The bloody footprints combined with his DNA is proof, they said, that he was in her apartment when she was murdered.
The bloody footprint put a timestamp of when the killer was there.
But the defense tried to poke holes in the footprint evidence. They also called that witness who had told police she saw Jeannie Childs with a blonde man wearing a trench coat the day she was murdered. And she said she saw the same man later running down the stairwell without a coat.
Jerry Westrom has dark hair. There's no evidence he ever had blonde hair or anything like that.
The defense also named Arthur Gray, who died in 2012, as an alternate suspect. Jeannie had accused him of domestic abuse.
And then when you put the hair of Arthur Gray in her hand, it starts to become more significant.
The defense, who declined our request for an interview, was dealt a blow when they couldn't introduce James Luther Carlton and John Eswine as alternate suspects. The judge ruled there wasn't enough evidence against either man, and prosecutors cleared them both. So the jury never heard that expert analysis of their footprints had been inconclusive.
I think it was incredibly damaging to the defense's case.
Prosecutors declined our request for an interview. Jerry Westrom did not testify, and after 8 days, the jury quickly reached a verdict. Guilty.
The jury Westrom guilt first and second-degree murder.
The jury came back quite quickly and convicted Jerry Westrom of the top count, which was murder in the first degree. They also found him guilty of murder in the second degree.
Prosecutors didn't present a motive. Wayne Triplett says he still believes his lifelong friend is innocent and says that both families have paid a terrible price.
The victim didn't deserve what they got. It's terrible. Saying here, Jerry's paying for that. But it's not Jerry.
On September 9th, 2022, Jerry Westrom was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Jeannie Childs.
As we said in the beginning, and we're saying now, you've got the wrong guy. We are sorry for the loss of Jeannie Childs' life.
Jeannie's mother, Betty, believes justice has been served and that the right man is behind bars. But her grief will always be there. She poured her heart out in a letter, a love letter she never got to send.
My emptiness will never go away since you were taken that fatal day. It wasn't fair. You had to die. I never got to say goodbye. I love you and miss you so much. Love and peace, Mom.
I can only describe it as evil, something horrible.
From 48 Hours, this is Trained to Kill, the dog trainer, the heiress, and the bodyguard.
He couldn't control his obsession.
Who was the hunter and who was the hunted? Follow and listen on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.